tools to succeed.
They will strive.
We will strive.
They will thrive.
We will thrive.
They will rise.
Yes, we will. Elevating futures. When we're elevating futures. Futures, yeah.
Today, I'm joined by Dr. James L. Moore III, the Assistant Director for STEM Education at the U.S. National Science Foundation, where he oversees a remarkable annual budget of over $1 billion dedicated to enhancing STEM learning across K-12 education and the workforce. A distinguished scholar and advocate for diversity, Dr. Moore is a leading voice in education, particularly focused on the experiences of African American males. Dr. Moore, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, how are you doing? It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to catch up, and I'm really excited about digging deeper into your work at NSF. But before we go that route, I would like to back up for our listeners and allow you to share with us why you chose to work in the field of education in the first place.
Wow. Well, first and foremost, when I was growing up in the rural South, in a small town outside of Spartanburg, Greenville area called Lyman, South Carolina, I'm a former student athlete, and I aspire, like many kids in my time, to play professional football. And certainly to stay balanced, my parents required that I do well in school to continue playing sports. And so had a lot of success in high school, and I attended a high school that is pretty renowned nationally for its athletic programs, and went on to play Division I AA football, and thought I was going to be a professional athlete, and many people thought I was good enough, but I tore my anterior cruciate knee ligament, and I was never the same athlete. And in those days, when you tore your ACL, it was sort of like a death sentence, particularly when you played at a smaller school. But nevertheless, I got an education primarily because I saw education as being redemptive and transformative. It certainly was put into me, embedded in my thinking and in my day-to-day, that it can change the hands you shake, the people you meet, and the places you go. And where I grew up, my mom went to college, but she didn't finish. And my dad didn't go to college because he was the older son. And the older son had to stick around and make sure that the other kids can function optimal. But to make a long story short, my mom worked in social services, and and that was just a central part of our lives. She sat on a lot of boards, nonprofits. She was very active in our church and in a lot of faith ministries across the county. And I knew she was held in high esteem. I saw the work that she did that really made a difference. But I knew I didn't want to be a social worker, primarily because it seemed like a life that you could never turn off. People were always coming up to my mom and say, "Oh, can you help me with this?" Or "Can you call this person?" And certainly she didn't mind, but it wasn't the life that I wanted to live. So education was one of those areas, and that's why I went in education, because I enjoy reading, I enjoy writing, I enjoy learning. And my siblings and I like to say our parents had 6 degrees, 2 doctorates, 2 masters, 2 bachelor's degrees, and an associate degree. And so we always felt that even though they didn't finish, my mom didn't finish, we felt that between the three of us, among the three of us, we can almost solve any problem that they may have.
Wow, that's amazing. And, we touched on a lot of things that we're going to revisit in this conversation. But I want to start with what you said about loving to read, loving to write, and those sort of things. You have an outstanding track record as an educator, as a researcher, as a speaker, and even as a mentor. So, what prompted you to work for the National Science Foundation at this stage of your career?
Well, let me just say I was minding my own business. Um, I believe the work that I was afforded the opportunity to be engaged in at Ohio State, I would do it for free. Um, and if my wife was here, she would probably think I was doing it for free. How immersed I was in that work. I mean, I'm a counselor by training, and so I'm forever enriched by seeing people realize their dreams and aspirations. It's quite refreshing, it's redemptive, and it's inspiring for me. And that's what I wanted to do. In many ways, the acorn didn't fall far from the tree uh, when I think about my mother and her efforts. Um, at NSF, at Ohio State, it was going through a lot of change. And it, at the time they were looking for someone to fill the position I have. And I've been at NSF before. I've left the university to come and be a program officer in another directorate. And I did that for 2.5 years, which was a great experience. Um, but I didn't see myself coming back. Nevertheless, being the assistant director of the Directorate for STEM Education. I was recruited. According to uh, the chair of the recruitment team externally, I had been nominated numerous times. And so she reached out to me the first time, and I was like, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, because you got to think at Ohio State, you know, it's a beloved institution. Its reach is unparalleled. Its impact is never ending, and we were thriving. We were doing things that I would say that very few institutions in the country were engaged in, particularly uh, from the perspective of our Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We're one of the oldest, largest, and most comprehensive office of its kind, and I was afforded the opportunity to be at the helm of leading it. At the largest diversity scholarship program. We had two students who had won a Rhodes Scholarship, one a Truman. Um, you know, we just were knocking it out of the park. I raised more money than the history of the office, more grant funds. I mean, our students were going to the top graduate and professional schools. Our students reflect all walks of life, from fifth generation college students to first. They were Christian, they were atheists, they were Muslim, they were white, they were from Appalachia, from rural areas, urban areas. Certainly, the office reflected the public good of a university, and that was inspiring. So then they called me a second time after I said, nah. And the second time they called me, and I said, oh, well, let me check into this. I made some phone calls, and I was intrigued with our director. And we don't use the term secretary or deputy secretary, but the equivalence of our director is a secretary. That's the only, and my position is equivalent to probably um, a deputy secretary of an agency. But because we're structured differently, we use the terms director. I'm the assistant director. All the directorate heads are assistant directors. And so I was quite intrigued because it was a chance to extend all the things I had been doing up to that point and be able to do it at the national level. And so I kind of did some time to reflect, talk to my family. Um, and I said, well, only thing I'll lose is a little time. And all they can do is say yay or nay. And so I applied. And in the government, it moves like a snail. I just assumed my wife would ask me, you heard back from NSF? I just said, I assume it was a long shot. And they called me and they extended the offer. And I realized that it's a chance for me to build on the masterpiece that I've been working on for a very long time. And some say, what is the masterpiece? It's to create opportunities everywhere for everyone. I certainly undeserving of the life that I have. Certainly my grandparents deserve this life much more than I do. And in my own way, it's my way to pay it forward. As you know, at Ohio State, we say that quite often. It's not to pay back, it's to pay it forward. Well, certainly I owe my grandparents and the communities that invested in me, where the love was sound, unconditional, never ending. And certainly they saw more in me than I saw in myself. And I wanted to replicate that. And that's what I've tried to do in every place that I've ever worked. I try to honor all those people who are not seen, their voices are not heard, primarily for a number of reasons. I won't go into detail, but I realize that I'm afforded an opportunity that I must not abuse, and I cannot be confused about the opportunity that I have to be able to advance our nation, most importantly, as well as create a groundswell where no matter what zip code you live in America, that you have access to the STEM ecosystem. And I'm laser focused on that. I've been laser focused on that for a very long time, beyond STEM. But now it gives me an opportunity to focus on STEM.
And see, by having that background in the community and that understanding of how to touch people's everyday lives, you are placed in such a position to make some meaningful change. And I say that because many times education policymakers and decision makers design initiatives based upon the trickle-down effect. So in other words, if we build it or if we provide it, then there's an assumption that students and families will automatically utilize it. So how will your work at NSF touch students and families directly?
Well, you know what? That's good. I'm a product of an 1890 and an 1860 institution. What I mean by that, I went to Delaware State University, historically Black college and university, a land-grant institution, and I got my master's and PhD from Virginia Tech, which is also a land grant. So these institutions were created for the public good of our nation. And these are things that I have reflected on a lot. And I'm indebted to those institutions for what they represent and what they strive to achieve. And so with that being said, my mom used to tell me, you can't help the people if you don't spend time with the people. And that stuck with me. And so anybody who knows anything about me, yeah, I am in the ivory tower, but I spend lots of time with what I call living, breathing, common folk. And I want to know what they experience. I want to know how we can build an apparatus where they can live the life that they want to live, where they can engage our democracy at the very highest level. It's hard to engage it if you're not afforded a quality education, or if you don't have access to the many opportunities that are available in a wealthy nation like the United States. I recognize I didn't choose my parents. I didn't choose the homes that they gave me a great life to live in, it was just by chance. Some might say divine, some might say by luck, some say it's a coincidence, but some, they have parents that they weren't afforded the same opportunity, and their parents want the same things that my parents wanted for me, and the same things that I want for my own children. But sometimes life circumstances. We know in itself, it's quite clear to us, is that talent is everywhere, but opportunities don't prevail everywhere. And we're trying to use our lot as an agency to harness or catalyze opportunities where people can realize their dreams and aspirations and contribute to addressing grand challenges of our time, as well as helping the nation move to the new frontier of STEM innovation, inquiry, and discovery. It's a noble quest. We have a noble mission, one that I never dread being a part of, or dread walking in the halls of the National Science Foundation. It has parallels to institutions of higher learning, which I've spent most of my life in. And I meet people of all walks of life. I meet people who are the most eminent or arguably the best in the world in what they do. And I also meet people who might not even have a college education. And but all of them are part of our nation, regardless of what side of the aisle, what their theology may be, what their political bent may be. From my perspective, they're part of this nation. And I try not to get myopic or become hypersensitive about things people may say or do that may be different from what I think about the world. We're a bipartisan agency, and we try to maintain that. We don't want politics to get into science, because that's never good, because that can hamper our ability to be able to address grand challenges of our time. And you can't talk about STEM, innovation, discovery, without talking about education. You know, one of the grand challenges of our time, or one of the grand civil rights issues of our time, is ensuring that every young person has access to quality teachers, curricula, experiences, and opportunities. As you know, being in Ohio, Southern Ohio is much different than other parts. It's different not because the people are different. It's different because opportunities don't prevail at the same level of some of our most affluent areas. As you know, in Ohio, we're pretty unique. We have 8 defined urban centers, as defined by the federal government, as defined by the state. I think it's 15 urban centers, and many of those urban centers, they have parallels to Appalachia or Southern Ohio. All my work being in Ohio State, not that I've done a lot of work in Appalachia or Southern Ohio, but certainly I built a career in urban America. And as a result of that work, I was able to keep my ears close to the ground and really look behind the curtain and shatter some of the myths, as well as learn about where the opportunities are. And so I recognize, because I have a deep affect, and it's hard for me to turn off of what I've seen, heard, and or experienced. And I realized that I might can't create the right bridge for all the kids that I came in contact with, but they live in my dreams, in my passions, in my dedication to their children's children.
Well, I remember the first time I met you must have been 2013, because I was looking for a committee member to help me connect the dots between social work and urban education. And I remember sitting across from you and echoing similar passion. Um, and you looked at me and you said, "Oh, that's valid. However, are you so sure that only urban students are struggling? Have you looked at the research of children of color who are now seeking to enhance their educational opportunities by attending suburban schools and private schools? And there are some disparities there worth mentioning." And so, with that said, I would like you to speak to, for parents listening, if you decide you want to enroll your child of color in a suburban or private school, what sort of things should they be looking out for, and what areas should they be prepared to advocate?
Well, I would say this regardless of whether you're a person of color or not, whether you grew up in a rural setting or urban setting, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or whatever. Never depend on the institution to educate your child. See the institution as an entity to facilitate or reinforce what you want for your child. Some parents, they can project, they know because they have lived experiences that are unprecedented, and they're well traveled, and they can see prophetically, if you will, where the world is going. And some, they may not always get to see where the world is going. They get to experience the world every day, and sometimes their experiences or what they experience in the world every day is not always positive. And sometimes it's not because I have a full slate of choices that I can think about. It's about what I'm being confronted on a day-to-day basis. It's a way to think about. So what I would say, certainly, as I would tell my own wife, good schools are schools that are successful with children that you're rearing in your household. When you look at schools and you look at their report cards, it's usually the aggregate. Now, increasingly, we disaggregate and see. But as my mother would say, when you say the average this, she would always tell me, you're not average. So that changed the paradigm, right? So you need to choose schools where you can see where your students are getting 5 things. And it's based on my own research. And I think it's the basis to what I do on every day. There's 5 things that influence education and career aspirations. 1 is interest. How do I enhance or expose my kids in such a way that they have no limitations in their interests, right? So when you think about interests, so many people will foreclose on different opportunities because they've never been exposed. So there's a correlation with interest and exposure. So if you attend a school that is going to enhance your exposure, then you'll probably have interests that others may not have where you come from. The second thing is preparation. Say we see preparation in a myopic way, but preparation should be more broad and more vast. Preparation is K to gray. At every juncture of your life, you never know if you're prepared until you confront it, whatever you've been confronted, or until you partake of it. So I would say it's my nature, but it's certainly what is well documented in research as well as the research I've conducted. I stay in the mode of preparation. I never know if I can do it until I do it. And I think the military is an excellent example of that. They wake up every day preparing for something that may not ever happen. Biological warfare, nuclear warfare, terrorism, all of these things they're preparing for, right? Just like any other public servant, you're preparing for the known and the unknown, right? So the third thing is experiences. We need to have educational and non-educational experiences that are indicative of where we're going. And sometimes we don't know where we're going, and that's why you can't foreclose on everything. We might say, I don't like eggs, but you find yourself, again, I wanted to be a professional athlete, but I veered off. But my preparation allowed me to veer off. I was able to go to graduate school for free. I was able to get a doctorate. I was able to do things because along that existential journey, I was developing my toolbox. The other one, it would be connections. Academic achievement is highly correlated with the relationship that a student has with his or her teacher. It's also highly correlated with the number of contact hours with your teacher. So connections are really important. And if you think about concentric circles or the boomerang concept, and think about social capital theory, well, social capital is I got experiences, I participate in programs, I know individuals that give me entree to places that I otherwise would not have. So as I said, my education has changed the hands I shake, the people I meet, and the places I go. And this job has taken this little boy from Lyman, South Carolina, to places that he couldn't even imagine, or to meet individuals who have abundance of wealth in ways that I couldn't ever imagine. But when they walk in this building, or when I met them, you realize that they put their pants on the same way I do. And oftentimes my suit might look a little nicer than theirs, and they don't even wear a suit. But we share similarities, right? Not always differences. And so the last one, opportunities, your interests, your preparation, your experiences, connections determine in large measure whether or not you can access opportunities. Sometimes you can put the opportunities right in front of them, but if they're not interested in it, if they don't have the preparation, or they don't have the experiences, or they don't have the connections to navigate, those can be short-lived or never lived at all. And so all of those 5 variables I've found to be crucial, and they should be embedded in educational and non-educational experiences, whether formal or informal. And these are things that parents can do. And if don't know your audience, but you may be a parent and say, hey, I want more for I think all parents, I'm gonna say all, parents want more for their children, but maybe you might say, I don't quite know how to do it. I can't get there. Well, I encourage all parents to utilize all the resources that are ready available to them, exhaust them. Oftentimes people don't exhaust the things that they have access to on a day-to-day, and they aspire for all these other things, and they haven't been good stewards with the things that they have right in front of them. And so I kind of look at people as assets, regardless of what they bring to the table or don't bring to the table. Oftentimes that's yet to be determined. And when I say yet to be determined, what I've learned in my own profession, counseling, relationships are important, but you can't develop a relationship if you don't spend time. I can guarantee you will not have a strong relationship that stand the test of time if you don't spend time. And oftentimes in this world that we live in, we say we don't have time. Well, then you're probably not going to have the kind of relationships that you profess that you want.
Wow, that is very helpful. And time is a resource that we have at discretion. You don't have to have a special talent to be able to delegate time. So thank you for that. As I was listening to you, I've heard all of these elements incorporated in the work that you've done at the Todd A. Bell National Resource Center for the African American Male. I've also listened to other podcasts where you talked about the specific initiatives you put in place for parents as incoming freshmen come in to make sure that they're successful. Can you tell us about some of those initiatives so that we can help other institutions better engage, recruit, and retain individuals of color and urban students?
Well, all you got to do is follow. If you follow athletics, they never talk about their dads. They always say, "Hi, mom." So when you look at the research, it suggests that IQ is highly correlated with father's income and mother's educational attainment. Moms, regardless of income levels, for the most part, they're doing most of the educational enrichment work or helping with homework in households in America. I'm not trying to be sexist. I'm just saying this is well documented in the social behavior science research literature. But there are some Renaissance fathers. I don't want to suggest that there's not a role. What we try to do is connect with families, right? Create the kind of communities that mimic where they come from. And what I mean by that is it starts with relationships. So, for example, we had early arrival programs that we try to engage the families because that's their loved one. That child is a piece of them, regardless of how you might think of the child. And so you want to ease their anxiety. You want them to know, especially at a big place, using Ohio State as an example, you want to families to see the place as more than just bricks and mortar. You want them to envision what it's like to be a student on that campus. You want to be able to help them when our personnel may be far away, in terms of who to contact and having someone that's going to be reliable that will respond. Not only that, it's important that families don't get caught up in the glitter and gold. The best institutions are the institutions that support the needs of your child. And parents oftentimes have good insights on what their child needs, right? I would say every person should not go to Ohio State, even though it's a special place to me. Everybody shouldn't go to a HBCU, even though I'm a product of a HBCU. What's important is to find the right institution, the right fit for what your child needs. I have 4 children, and they all are different. And I recognize they have the intellectual capabilities to go to very selective institutions. But it wouldn't be the best thing for some of my children. Primarily, some need a smaller institution where they can engage and they can feel connected. And one of my children, I won't say she or he, because they might hear this podcast because they'll start thinking that they'll know who I'm talking about. But one, it doesn't matter. Could adapt intellectually, socially, just wired totally different, right? And so I think good parenting, good coaching, good teaching, and good mentoring is meeting the person where they are and adapting it accordingly. Great schools, great universities adapt to students rather than forcing students to adapt to them. So if you want to be student-centered, I like to think I am student-centered. And not only do I try to work hard, but I try to I know it's important to spend the necessary time. And when I was the vice provost, I would say I was one of the I probably spent more time with students than any vice provost. I would argue that until someone can disprove that. And I built it in the apparatus. And so there are benefits to that, what we tried to achieve, what we modeled. You talked about the Bell National Resource Center. We had over 40-something universities around the United States that contacted us, trying to ask us to help them and replicate. And we can talk about pre-entry characteristics or whether your parents college educated or what have you. If you don't create the right conditions for excellence, it doesn't happen. And unfortunately, sadly, in education, we don't treat education totally like how we treat athletics. If you're a 5-star athlete and you come to Ohio State, the coaches don't stop coaching. They don't start, they always trying to get optimal performance. And I think, I know I might have made you mad at times, but I come out of that arena, I'm trying to get optimal performance out of myself, as well as anyone who come in contact with me. Because at the end of the day, we have to make excellence a priority. Whether we obtain it or not, that's yet to be determined. But one thing I believe, you probably won't obtain it if you don't make it a priority. And it's a priority for me.
And I can attest to that. And I can also attest to never been mad. And I'll go back to what you talked about earlier in terms of experience. I do come from a well-educated family. In the generation ahead of me, my father has a PhD and a doctorate of ministry. And so education has always been a priority in our household. However, you don't know what you don't know. And so when you've been a high performer, you don't meet your match until you meet your match. And you won't know who your match is unless you have a great mentor or a great coach that starts pressing you ahead of time. So all the time, I know I always joke with you about you get me the blues. But that's what it takes. The world doesn't stop turning just because you step on the scene. And so everything that you have instilled has been preparation. I remember in my, I think it was the candidacy exam, and you said, you picked up the paper and you said, you have written what could be a $5 million grant to a federal agency. So you had the audacity to envision this. Now you got to tighten it up so that it would be funded. And so in speaking challenge, you're also speaking life. And so that's why I led with the National Foundation. You could have traveled all over this nation and spoke, drawn a check, and went on to the next town. You could have continued to mentor probably thousands, or at this point, maybe tens of thousands of mentees and set them up to do the work while you focused on things that are not necessarily so taxing in terms of time. And so we appreciate you having that understanding of, in order to talk about the fight, you still got to be in it to a certain degree. So we thank you for being willing to walk in those different spaces, still speaking, still teaching, still leading, still being around the community, and still bringing the rest of the community to the conversation. That is one of the things that I see as a challenge in the education space. We talk a lot about workforce development. We talk a lot about businesses. But what you said about making sure that the community you build reflects the community that people are exposed to, that is the key. And bring in those different programs that speak to the whole child, the whole adult, and their mental and emotional well-being, and not just, okay, I'm going to teach them a skilled trade and they're going to make a lot of money and that's going to be the end of it. So I can see all of the influences, the multi-generational influences that you have spoken to. And we are especially appreciative because you're putting it in action. I remember my dad said one time, he said, you know what, the best tribute, when I pass away, the best tribute that you can do to me is not to talk about me, but just try to live out the values I tried to teach. And you're doing that for your family. And we thank you for that as well.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you constantly carrying the banner of inclusion and putting out the clarion call that there are many more possibilities for you as a young person. I know the work that you do is important, and at times it may not feel like no one cares, but you build an equity in ways you'll never know how much equity you build until you get to a place where you can reflect. Right now, you can't reflect because you're in the fire. You're constantly trying to create a groundswell. I can tell you, even in Washington, D.C., I bump into some students. I can remember their names, some I can't. I have a student that frequently, I get up really early. I get up about 3 or 4 every morning. And sometimes I go watch the news. And one of my former mentees who went to Ohio State, she's from this area. I'll see her on CNN because she's the White House correspondent from Bloomberg. And sometimes she's on CNN. And every time I take a picture and I send it to her and said, you made me so proud. And listen, she was going to be successful without me. I don't want to suggest that I had anything to do with her success. But what we tried to do is create the conditions at the institution, everywhere I go, where people can live their best self, where they can reach their dreams and aspirations. And some of it is realizing that though I might have an A, but can I do more? You know, helping people define that methodological approach for their lives where they can reach optimalism, where they can reach optimization, where they can be their best self. And, you know, when someone is being their best self, sometimes we may fall short in the larger scheme of things, but we build our psychological and emotional fortitude, you know. So, you know, after I left athletics, one of the things I had to find for meaning and purpose, because that's really important to me, is that I had to find something that gave me fire in my belly, as well as something that I can work towards. And creating opportunities for everyone is one that I'm fixed, I'm focused, and committed to. And I read lots of journal articles, I read a lot of books. When I see someone outside of my sector in the space, if someone told me that that person is the best in the business or one of the top, I sit down and I don't have to know anything about it. I'm just studying the person because, again, I want to reach optimization. I want to be the best James, right? And to me, that's how I'm fulfilled. The best James could fall short of trying to compete with person X because that might limit being the best James. All I'm trying to do is be better than that person. And so being an athlete, you used to competing, but after I no longer had athletics in my life, I learned how to compete against myself. So I'll tell you something real funny that a lot of people, since I was 4 years old, I have been writing all my goals down every year. For the new year, I got all the goals. When I got married and had kids, I write all the goals for my spouse and my kids, and I never share any of the goals with them. And people look at me and say, well, and I said, the reason why, because some people will fight you to tell you why they can't meet that, why we want to achieve that goal. And so what I learned is my job, I believe, as dad, as husband, is to create conditions in which they can achieve those goals. At the end of the year, I tell my wife, I say, hey, we met these goals, and some are repetitive. They stay in the books. And my mom always said, you ain't serious about achieving something if you don't write it down. And I don't know, that stuck with me. I got goals for NSF, but I don't tell everybody the goals. But I've written them down. And you know, like as I said before, I'm immensely fortunately blessed. And I don't take it lightly. I realize I have an opportunity that not many people have been afforded. But I also know that it took a lot of preparation to get to this place. So when I meet some people, or even when I'm talking to my own children, they say they want to do eggs. And I say, give me an example of someone who's doing eggs and tell me not about their success, tell me what it took for them to get there. Because if you know what it took for them to get there, you might not be willing to do it, right? And you got to make it up in your mind that you're willing. Not to say everybody's lot is the same, not that everyone has to follow the same pathway, but I'm saying it's better to get a sense of what it took. And, you know, I learned from my mother, she really broke down sacrifice. I used to go to my mom and say, Mom, thanks for all the sacrifice. And she corrected me one time. She said, sacrifice is doing something that you don't want to do. She said, I wanted to do it. And that was a paradigm shift. When people say they sacrifice something, that sounds like you didn't want to do it, right? So she said, I love you that much that I wanted to do it. I wanted the ball in my hands. I didn't want nobody else to have it, right? Sacrifice is saying, I mean, can you really give all that you can if you say you're sacrificing yourself? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a play on words, but my mom had that gift of tongue and wordsmithing to appeal to one's moral and spiritual consciousness.
Well, Dr. Moore, we appreciate you for tirelessly creating the conditions for excellence from neighborhoods to universities to communities to the national level. Thank you for taking our time to speak with us today. It truly was a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
When you show us what we can be, give us the tools to succeed.
They will strive, they will thrive.